Scott Corbett, who became my partner, had a technology where they were putting an ultrasound probe on the tip of a finger. So the probe would go around the finger. And the interest was at that time from DoD because they thought that you could take this technology and use it out in the battlefield and do battlefield triage. And I looked at it and said, well, gee, if you could put it on the end of a finger, why couldn't you put it on the end of a scope?
Dr. Stephen Steinberg, Chief Medical Officer and founder of EndoSound. It's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
So, Steve, as we get started, I have an AI agent introduce you. So let me go ahead and play that video for you. I hope you can see Jenny.
Welcome to a groundbreaking episode of our podcast, where we shine a spotlight on the innovators and pioneers who are reshaping the landscape of healthcare and medical technology. Today, we're thrilled to welcome a luminary in the field of gastroenterology, a visionary whose contributions have not only advanced medical practice but have also opened new avenues for accessible and cost-effective patient care. Meet Dr. Stephen Steinberg, the founder and chief medical officer of EndoSound, a company at the forefront of revolutionizing endoscopic ultrasound (EUS) technology. With an illustrious career spanning over 4 decades, Dr. Steinberg has dedicated his life to enhancing the diagnosis and treatment of gastrointestinal disorders through innovative endoscopic techniques. A graduate magna cum laude in physics from Cornell University and with honors from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Dr. Steinberg's journey is one of relentless pursuit of excellence and innovation. His professional career is marked by thousands of EUS procedures, mentoring countless clinicians and trainees, and serving as a key opinion leader for major endoscope and medical device companies. His academic tenure of 30 years has seen him ascend to the rank of full professor of medicine and surgery, where his work has left an indelible mark on the field. But perhaps one of Dr. Steinberg's most significant contributions is the co-invention of the Endosound Vision System, EVS, a revolutionary technology that addresses one of the most pressing challenges in gastroenterology, making EUS accessible and affordable. The EVS ingeniously transforms existing flexible video gastroscopes into ultrasound endoscopes, breaking down the barriers of cost and access that have long restricted the widespread use of this critical diagnostic tool. Under Dr. Steinberg's leadership, EndoSound is not just developing medical devices, it's creating pathways to better healthcare outcomes by making advanced diagnostics available to more providers and, consequently, to more patients around the world. So, without further ado, let's dive into a conversation with Dr. Stephen Steinberg as we explore the journey of EndoSound, the impact of the vision system, and the future of endoscopic technology in improving patient care. Dr. Steinberg, welcome to the show.
Sure. Thank you. Boy, it's really nice to see how AI has got the idea of flattery.
I hope the AI Jenny got that right.
She's very good. She's very good.
I'm glad to hear that. So once again, Dr. Steinberg, I'm excited to have this conversation and a very warm welcome to the Scope Forward show. We were talking earlier, what excites me about the show is to watch the pace of innovation that's happening in gastroenterology and leaders such as you who've been on the clinical side and who are stepping up into innovation and creating this next wave of medical devices, digital technology that is reshaping gastroenterology. It's quite amazing to see. So I want to get to the basics, to get us going. I'd like to know what got you going as an innovator. How did you come about with this innovation? And maybe you can tell us about what the innovation is before you get to the story of how you got started.
Endoscopic ultrasound is an endoscopy technology. Everybody, I think, is familiar with endoscopy, the ability to use a flexible scope to look through somebody's mouth at the esophagus and the stomach and parts of the small intestine. And surely people are familiar with surface ultrasound, butterfly, and other technologies that allow us to look at organs and areas of the body from the outside in. And endoscopic ultrasound simply takes that same technology and looks from the inside out. And because we're located on the end of the scope and can reach areas that are not reachable with surface ultrasound, we get a view and we have the ability to intervene and do interventions in places of the body that were previously not reachable. It's basically an imaging technology like MRI, like CT, And the real concept is that if you can see something, you can do something.
So, how did you get going with EndoSound? When did you start it? And what is the backstory here?
The backstory is that probably now more 10, 11 years ago, it became clear to me that the technology, which was emerging at that time and becoming more and more important, more and more useful in the field of endoscopy, more and more interventional, was really limited in terms of the availability. The legacy systems were costing upwards of $500,000. Accessibility, availability was limited. And even as the utility was increasing, the accessibility was staying the same or decreasing. And so I started thinking about the idea of, could we find a way of essentially democratizing endoscopic ultrasound? Could we find a way of making it accessible to people who had a regular scope, but who didn't have a $500,000 capital budget to bring this technology on to their location, whether it be a hospital or a surgery center or wherever? And I spent a lot of time effectively chasing the strategics with my fabulous idea and having them pat me on the head and say, gee, that's just great. Come back when you have something a little more tangible. And probably the Sentinel event was serendipitous, as things often are. And that was in about 2018, 17, 18. My wife was the provost and chief operating officer at Oregon Health Sciences. And because of that, she was in charge of tech transfer. And I was literally flying back and forth across the country from Florida to Portland, Oregon every weekend. And on this particular weekend, she said, I'm having a meeting with a small startup group, a company called Sonovate, that has a technology in ultrasound. And I wonder if you'd sit in on the meeting. And so I said, sure. And I get to the meeting, and the technology is that Scott Corbett, who became my partner, had a technology where they were putting an ultrasound probe on the tip of a finger. So the probe would go around the finger. And the interest was at that time from DoD, because they thought that you could take this technology and use it out in the battlefield and do battlefield triage. You would have it on the end of your finger. You could get under a flak jacket. You could triage people out in the field. And DoD was interested in their development of this. And I looked at it and said, well, gee, if you could put it on the end of a finger, why couldn't you put it on the end of a scope? So that literally started the conversation. Scott Corbett, fortuitously, was an ultrasound engineer trained at Penn State, as you know, the epicenter of ultrasound back to submarine warfare days. And so Scott and I got to talking, and it turned out that you really couldn't put a probe on the end of a scope in the same way he put it on the end of a finger. And after 2 years or so, we actually came up with the current design that allowed us to incorporate ultrasound onto a flexible endoscope, and also do one other critical user requirement, which was to be able to do intervention. It was to be able to get a needle or other ultrasound accessory out into the field of view so that you could do something with the image that you could see. And it took us another 2-3 years after that, and then 3 more years of technology development and FDA to finally get to a product that got released on December 27th of last year and cleared by the FDA. But it was really quite serendipitous. If I didn't walk into that meeting with Scott, then I would probably still be, drawings on the back of a napkin and things of that sort.
That's an amazing story, and congratulations to you and the whole team. This is quite an amazing achievement. And also congratulations on the FDA. I saw the announcement come out in Jan. So that's exciting. So now the product is commercial.
So we are currently in launch. And so we're doing a limited launch to make sure that we understand how people will use it, what the best ways are to set it up in a surgery center or in a hospital. We have a similar limited launch in Latin America. And so right now, the goal is to make sure that we find the right niche, that people are getting the most value out of it, and that we position it so that it's as adoptable as possible for the general population of gastroenterologists.
I want to go back to the story a little bit because I have a few questions there. From that point, 2017, 2018, and when you got together with Scott and you got going, and what were the biggest bottlenecks or challenges that you faced to get it to the point of even the first, I think in 2021, you had breakthrough designation from FDA. So I'm sure, there would have been a period prior to that the product would have been somewhat in beta or ready. But what were the biggest bottlenecks and challenges that you faced?
I think the biggest bottlenecks were, this is a relatively complex technology. So We were not in a situation, for example, where we invented something that could be extruded out of plastic and you just needed to find somebody to do the molds and make iterations. We were dealing with something that had electronic components, that had ultrasound components that all had to be pieced together. Fortunately, my partner Scott had all of those connections because of his previous experience, both career-wise and with Sonovate. And so that was a big help, but we still needed to get relatively complex technology modified to suit our needs. And that's both challenging from an engineering point of view and also challenging from a pocketbook point of view. It's expensive to do those kinds of things. And so I think that was probably the biggest challenge. We had some, I guess, unfortunate fortune, which is that the issues that came up with the duodenoscope and infection transmission happened just at about the same time. FDA was very interested in the risk factor of the transmission of a threatening bacteria. And they, at that time, realized that the same problem existed with the linear echo endoscopes. The same elevator existed there that existed in the duodenoscope. And so, again, we were fortunate that we were going into the FDA with an alternative that said, hey, we can do away with the elevator. We can make this technology both safer and more accessible. And the FDA was very interested in that. And that was the reason that we got breakthrough designation. So again, it was a lot of the right place, right time kind of circumstance.
Steve, I often like to explore exponential technologies, and these are advanced technologies that are multiplying as a force. It's just not one technology in action, but there are two, three. For example, from the outside, it seems to me that, for your innovation to make it to where it has, imaging had to advance independently. Sensor technology had to advance independently. I don't know if robotics plays a role or not, but I think mechanical parts becoming smaller and their ability to fit in, all that had to advance, and there could be more. So I want to explore with you on what might be the broader implications of broader innovations that have been happening in the field of technology medicine, even beyond medicine, that would have enabled this innovation to come through.
I think the one that comes immediately to mind is are the advances in 3D printing. Right? The challenge when dealing with plastics and disposables and things like that is, how do you iterate? How do you, right? Everything, as you know, science is not getting it right. It's figuring out what you got wrong, making an adjustment, getting it wrong again, but less wrong, and getting closer and closer to what sometimes we call the truth, but whatever that really is, right? And so the challenge is, how do you iterate, right? How do you iterate in a fashion that's efficient? How do you iterate in a way that preserves capital, because it can be expensive to iterate? And I think probably the biggest advance there is in the way 3D printing has evolved, because it allows you to iterate not only in an efficient and relatively less expensive way, but you can iterate in hours rather than in weeks and months it takes to do molds and recreate activities. So you can look at something, you can make a change. By the afternoon, you can have a new part, a new version that allows you to reassess and then move forward. To my mind, that's the biggest one. In our field, in ultrasound, we have single crystal. That was a big image enhancement. It allowed us to have a smaller device with better imaging, so that we actually have imaging technology that is more advanced than the legacy systems currently offer. And there are more technological advances coming, some of which have been evidenced in Butterfly, that will bring ultrasound chips down to the pennies, which means ultimately it will be a potentially totally disposable alternative. So those are I think those are the two areas, but to my mind, it's about 3D printing. It has made such a difference in the ability to implement ideas and make changes.
Did you have a 3D printer in your lab, or did you work somewhere where there was a 3D printer available to you?
So in the early days, when we hired our first engineer, he was very knowledgeable in 3D printing and was sending work out to a lab nearby that had a 3D printer. And it took us about 3 weeks of listening to him say, I've got this idea, I've got to change, I'm going to send it out, before Scott and I said, well, why don't we own one of these? And so that was probably our first significant capital expense. which was to get a 3D printer into the lab so that we could make these changes ourselves.
How much did it cost?
That one cost about $28,000, and it wasn't among the more sophisticated ones. It was suitable for our needs, but there are now 3D printers that print with FDA-approved materials and that are literally have the capacity to print commercially available items. So when we have something that we want to change and we want to go to market with immediately, we can 3D print it. It's a little more expensive than doing molds, but it gets you out to the marketplace even as you get the molds done and get a much less expensive way of producing a product like that.
How interesting. And I'm sure that 3D printer, that quality of 3D printing technology has dropped even more in cost, right now. Like what would that $28,000 printer cost right now if someone would?
Without knowing, but I'm guessing it would be in the teens or even less than 10,000 because the technology is advancing so rapidly. It's hard to keep track.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to get to the money and the funding question. How did you and your team figure that out?
Credit cards.
Okay.
So, I think both Scott and I were fortunate to be at a time in our careers where our kids were done with college, our mortgages were at least well on their way to being, paid off, and we were relatively comfortable. And so we could self-fund the initial aspects of the product, getting to the point of saying, this is something that we think is worth pursuing, is worth adding additional capital to. At that point, we went to friends and family. I literally sent out an email to a large group of my Cornell friends, and I said, for those of you that have no interest in taking a risk, stop here and don't be embarrassed about not answering my email. And for those of you who might be interested in what we think is interesting technology and might have a reward in terms of an investment opportunity, risky as it is, then keep reading. And we were able, with that and with the addition of Josh Cohen, Josh was our first significant hire. He is our chief commercial officer. And Josh had been the chief of marketing for endoscopy and ultrasound for Pentax. So he knew everybody in the space. I knew he was a great salesman because he had sold me $1.5 million worth of EOS equipment over the years. And so he was able to reach out to many physicians who knew the space and therefore understood the potential significance of what we were doing. And so that added an insider look and experience to people who are interested in investing. Our first round was friends and family, and that took us a good way. I think it was $1.2 million that we were able to raise, and that went a long way.
And subsequently, AGA also invested, correct? Like through the AGA?
Right. And so after that, we went to the Shark Tank in San Francisco and won the Shark Tank and represented both the AGA and then separately the ASGE as Innovation of the Year. And AGA, along with Varia, a VC company, came together to have the Innovation Fund. And so they participated in our Series A, and that was a huge help as well, both by virtue of the funds, but also by virtue of the stamp of approval that brought us in terms of looking and talking to other people. Fundraising is a real challenge. It's really expensive to do these things. It's expensive to do all of the testing that the FDA requires. And once you have a product, to get through the clearance process, I would say it's probably the biggest challenge of the process, which is that we don't have pathways. Somebody with an innovation can take and say, hey, this is where we go, this is how we do it. And by the way, we have funding capability for it. That, I think, is probably the biggest challenge. It's what the AGA's Innovation Fund is aimed at doing. I think, unfortunately, it has gotten caught in the downturn in the capital markets. And so they don't have perhaps as much available capital as they would like to. And hopefully that will change, as the markets improve. But I think the variability in the markets and access to capital is the biggest risk, biggest challenge overall in terms of moving something like this or any other innovation forward.
And how much did they invest, or what is the total capital that you finally ended up raising?
So to date, we've raised $11 million, and we're in the midst of going out on our Series B raise as we commercialize. Right now, we're in obviously a much better position. We have FDA clearance, so the risk of regulatory has been laid to rest. We have a pipeline of sites that are interested in taking on our technology, and so we're beginning to move through that pipeline to get our installations up and running. So hopefully, that will improve the receptivity on the part of the capital markets. But it remains a really, really challenging time. If you were to look at, PitchBook and some of the other publications or media that follow this area, what you find is there are too many down rounds and too many places, too many, companies that aren't finding funding.
So, Steve, I'm curious to know if you have an AI angle to what you're doing, or if you plan to. Is it just hardware, medical device, or do you also have an artificial intelligence implementation or integration along with what you're currently doing?
Absolutely. I think, AI is on everybody's mind these days, and it quickly became apparent to us that as endoscopic ultrasound is an imaging technology, imaging is among the areas that AI has made great strides and has been very useful, particularly even in gastroenterology. And so we were able to engage with now three different groups that are interested in promoting AI and its utility in endoscopic ultrasound for a large degree because we can't do it ourselves, right? We're a small shop. We have to focus on, in the past, getting to regulatory, now getting to the marketplace. And so things like this that require additional bandwidth are a great use of partners, and we've got some excellent partners in this regard. And the approaches that have been of greatest interest have been twofold. One is the area of the use of AI in education as people are learning the images that are presented by endoscopic ultrasound to make sure that they understand what they're looking at, what pathology might be involved, even, for example, where to best take a biopsy to have the best yield in that regard. The second side is an interesting one, I think, on the certification side. And we've had some discussions with the folks over at FIGHT on the Foundation for Interventional Therapeutic Endoscopy. How do you actually certify people? And it seems to us that AI in this regard would be an excellent tool. So, for example, if a trainee were doing an EUS exam, AI could identify the fact that they had reached all of the stations that were appropriate to the examination, that if they missed a station, that AI could in fact identify that and show them the station that they ought to be identifying, the view that they ought to obtain. It could track how long it took them to do the exam. And ultimately, it could provide a record that said, after 47 exams, this trainee now gets the stations 95% of the time and in a time frame that is appropriate to the exam, say 15 minutes or less. And therefore provide an objective way of certifying people or presenting a credential that says they've achieved a certain level of proficiency, and we can do that in a way that doesn't involve the subjectivity of mentors and et cetera. And so I think, to my mind, those are at least two of the AI activities that lend themselves very well to endoscopic ultrasound. And I'm sure there'll be a ton more as we move forward and as we get more experience with them. We were fortunate in that our device has been demonstrated to work with the AI learning that has occurred with the legacy systems. And so it was an easy transition to have those algorithms applied to our technology.
Very nice. I'm curious to know, what this next fundraising is for. You said you're doing a Series B. What is the size of funds that you're raising? And what is the use of the funds?
So we're looking for Series B to raise the $12 million. And the use of those funds is commercialization, inventory, building up our sales force, basically all of the go-to-market expenses that are now before us.
I want to back up to your own story, and at the point of time, when you got going with this and you said, I'm going to jump into this, build this startup with Scott and actually do this thing. Why did you have to do that? Why not just relax and continue whatever you were doing? Why go through this trouble and pain of innovation, creating something at the point that you were in your career?
That's really interesting. I have never been able to leave anything on the table. And so whether it was developing a therapeutic endoscopy program, and I think this is now my third or fourth one, I've always been sort of driven by seeing something that could or would or should be done and a need to do it. And sometimes it's gotten me in trouble and sometimes not, because sometimes people don't want to hear about things that you think are obvious opportunities and that they don't see. This one, fortunately, was under my own control and under Scott's control. And it just seemed to us as it evolved, it was slow at first. At first we got a beamformer. We used the old technology from Scott's old company, and we started getting some images. We had a phantom. The needle came out. It hit the target. We started getting excited. And at that point, there was no turning back. It was too much of an opportunity. There was too much of a need in the healthcare space. And at that point, we were hooked. I've always, throughout my career, been interested in things like that. And so this was just another one of those stages, although in a slightly different space.
If everything turns out, like the way that you're thinking, all the commercialization, the scaling and everything, and even better than, how you're thinking, what kind of a disruptive force would this device be in the industry?
I think it's been an interesting question, and the big players are among the people that, that we're talking to and that are following us. And I think we see this as a role for multiple technologies, as there often is the case, as we expand and as we see. So our initial space is in what we're calling sort of general endoscopic ultrasound. So maybe there are three layers of endoscopic ultrasound to my mind, right? The first layer is one in which perhaps you do imaging only and use the results of that imaging to draw conclusions, perhaps to send the patient along to somebody who's more experienced than you are. The second level is one in which one is taking samples, FNA, fine needle aspirates, fine needle biopsies, to obtain diagnostic material. And that's probably where most people are in the endoscopic ultrasound space these days. And that's one that's growing rather rapidly, particularly, as we see more and more personalized medicine, the need for samples, the need for genetic analysis, the ability to inject chemotherapeutic agents or biologic agents. So that would be, I think, the second level. And then the third level is the interventional kinds of things that we're doing, draining gallbladders, gastrojejunostomies, extra-luminal kinds of activities with axiostents and other devices like that. So I think those are the three levels that I see. Right now, we're most interested in the first two, although we have had experience using lumen-opposing stents with our device, and it's worked quite nicely. We see the need in terms of accessibility in the first two spaces. And so in the US, it's about cost and about the fact that fewer than 20% of general hospitals, non-academic hospitals, have endoscopic ultrasound, and fewer than 3% of surgery centers have access to this capability. So that's a huge unmet need. You go outside of the US and the need expands exponentially, right? It's a technology that has just simply been unavailable, even as it becomes more important. And so the ability to effectively democratize EUS is, to my mind, that's the holy grail. The idea that this becomes ultimately a part of a regular endoscopic examination. And so why would you do an endoscopy on somebody for gastrointestinal symptoms, nausea, vomiting, weight loss, abdominal pain? Why would you just look at the surface, the lumen of the esophagus, stomach, and duodenum, when you could look at the surrounding structures in the mediastinum, when you could look for lymph nodes, you could look at the pancreas, gallbladder, biliary tree at the same time? Why wouldn't we embark on what we think is that transformational level, which is echoendoscopy? The idea that every endoscopy gets the maximum amount of information from putting somebody to sleep and putting a scope down. And that includes imaging optically, but it also includes imaging from an ultrasound point of view. So as I look at it, that's a space where the legacy technologies doesn't lend itself as well to, and where we can make a huge, literally transformational impact. There are 10 million upper endoscopies that get done in this country. And, I don't know if you do endoscopic ultrasound, but the patients that I see often get to me after a round of PPIs, an upper endoscopy, a regular ultrasound. They still have pain, so the PPIs are increased. Now they get a CT scan, and now they're still having discomfort. So now they end up coming for a survey, diagnostic endoscopic ultrasound. Why wouldn't that be the first step in an exam if you're going to do upper endoscopy?
Steve, what kind of advice do you have for other potential innovators out there in GI? There may be somebody who may be listening to this, watching this, and thinking, I want to be in his shoes, but I don't know how to go about it because I'm so busy in the endoscopy room and I have family, I have kids, I'm busy and I have to complete my EHR. So where does one get time to do all this, that you're talking about?
As you heard, my journey was serendipitous, right? I was fortunate that, I trained back with the stars. So my co-fellows in endoscopy were Marty Freeman and John Bailey. In my first academic position at Stony Brook, my colleague was Bill Brugge. And so I've had an opportunity to watch watch therapeutic endoscopy evolve from the early days of ERCP, literally when I did my first one in 1980, to a time when we are now a specialty in and of ourselves. I don't actually have a good answer to your question for all of the reasons that you just stated, that we have so many things pulling and tugging at us that are really important, right? Family is most important. Earning a living, having a professional life that's satisfying and satisfying all the requirements of that professional life are next on the list and critical and really difficult. And I think, I was fortunate that this idea sort of started to blossom at a time in my life when my 4 kids were out of the house. My wife is actually the star of the family and has a career and activities in and of herself. And we had some means that we could bring financially that didn't, cause us to mortgage the house in order to be able to move forward. I think the answer to your question is that I don't have a good answer to your question, that these things depend on a lot of luck and a lot of circumstance, and to a large degree, not only how good the idea is, but will people take interest in it because you can make money off of it, right? A great idea that would really help healthcare that the markets don't see a profit in may not go anywhere. And that's in some ways really unfortunate, right? That we don't have a system that says, hey, a good idea that's vetted has a home, can find a home. I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't.
Thank you for taking a dig at that and being honest with that. That's helpful. In an odd way, reassuring to hear that yes, everybody goes through these struggles. And yet, there could be opportunities to find a way and it may just show up on its own. But again, provided that you really want to do something about what is going on in your mind.
Yeah, and I think that's credit, to the AGA for the technology summit that occurs each year in April, and for for the idea that trying to help fund these activities is both worthwhile from a healthcare point of view and an appropriate activity for the society to be engaged in. For the reasons that you started talking about at the beginning, which is how do we as a group of gastroenterologists, either individually or through our societies, how do we make progress? How do we promote the things that are important to us and our patients? Can we enhance the pathways?
So my final question, Steve, as we wrap up our conversation is, when you look at the future of gastroenterology from the lens that you're seeing, from everything that you know, and if you were to throw a stone 3 years, 5 years from now, what do you see happen?
I think the challenges are ones that are not unique to gastroenterology. Every day you look, some media, some publication, something that talks about physician burnout. I would take issue with that. Burnout to me means that you're doing the same task over and over and over and over again, and you just can't stand it anymore. And so you're burned out. I look at this as a situation where most of us would love to be able to do the tasks that we are trained to do and that we get up in the morning to do, to take care of our patients, to get some satisfaction out of doing that, but that we are inhibited from doing that from forces that are outside of our control. Probably the most obvious recent example was prior authorization, right? That would be a good example. That's not about burnout. That's about somebody getting in the way of us doing what we've been trained to do and what we went into medicine in general, and gastroenterology as well, to do, to be able to use the skills and the education and the experience that we've acquired to provide the best healthcare decision-making and interventions for our patients. And when things get in the way of that EHR that you talked about at 10 o'clock at night, or the hedge fund that is changing the face, in particular of gastroenterology these days, that's to my mind the biggest threat to professional satisfaction and ultimately to the care that we can provide our patients. It's to some degree magnified in gastroenterology because the hedge fund market has been quite active and prominent, but I think it affects medicine in general, and that's my biggest concern: is do we get to do what we know best for our patients and what we're able to do, and how do we preserve that? What do we do to preserve our voice on behalf of our patients in the face of market and other activities that are tending to make that more and more difficult for us?
Thank you so much for reflecting on that very important question. It makes me reflective as well. Like, it would be interesting to see what would happen the coming 5 years and how GI professionals will take to it.
And so if you say, well, gee, from the GI doc's point of view, I'm in some ways fortunate. I do only therapeutic endoscopy. And so I get to do the cool stuff, if you will, and things that have a big impact on the patients that I take care of. And I sit next to a group of extraordinarily well-trained general gastroenterologists, and I see the degree to which they are forced more and more and more into throughput, volume, procedures. The idea of being outside of the box is more and more difficult, less and less available. In some ways, it's one of my thoughts about the idea of democratizing EUS and about echoendoscopy, which is providing gastroenterologists with another tool, with another way, hopefully will expand horizons. And even as it, maybe helps with the healthcare that we deliver, also provides some more professional satisfaction. As you say, I've been at this a long time, and the most satisfying things were all of the changes that allowed me to do more, to think about other things, to be more involved. And hopefully, perhaps democratizing EUS will provide a little bit of that opportunity for general gastroenterologists as we go forward.
One related question, Steve, is when you're thinking about the future, I know you talked about more from an industry and systemic standpoint, but even from a tech standpoint, with the digitization of gastroenterology, where do you see that go?
I think as we do, liquid and other biopsies, we may see a huge transformation. Colonoscopy, surveillance colonoscopy is at risk for going away. And the implications in terms of how gastroenterologists spend their time, and in addition, where remuneration comes from, is going to have a huge impact. And what's going to take the place of that? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that. But I think, as you say, things are moving much more rapidly forward, right? The first industrial revolution took 100 years. The most recent ones take, 5 and 10 years. And we're seeing the same thing in technology and AI and all of this. And, I think we will be in a situation where probably we will need to be more and more specialized in the things that we do, and that more and more of what we do may be handed off to people with specific training, but lesser training that take care of routine tasks that we oversee, and that AI helps us oversee. And so it's, how does AI help us identify things that actually require humans to intervene on, boy, that's a whole other discussion, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it'll be an active one this year and coming years. It's going to be a lot about AI. On that note, Dr. Steven Steinberg, Chief Medical Officer and founder of EndoSound, thank you so much for joining me on the Scope Forward show. This has been a fantastic conversation.
My pleasure. And congratulations on your efforts. I think they bring a lot to the space.